I didn't want to be the first one to sit. We have an extraordinary opportunity here to hear from two of the finest composers in America today, and how they got to be where they are, and how this music that we heard this afternoon, and will hear this afternoon, came to be. I'd like to start with a rather gentle question of each of our panelists. And Sam, maybe we can start with you. You gave us a little hint earlier, but can you describe some of the earliest musical memories that you remember from your childhood?
Well, I was born in the city of Mannheim, which was Mozart's favorite orchestra, and a city where he fell in love with two women. He married one, but was in love with the other one all his life, and wrote some wonderful music for her. And I was born in the house where the Webers lived. That is, the hospital was on that site, and Constanze Weber was his wife. And there was a plaque on the hospital which said that Mozart lived here, and this was the Weber house and so on. My mother took a picture of it, said to my father, our son is going to be a composer. So it was preordained, no pressure there. And that was the earliest musical memory. No, and my father being a composer and a wonderful pianist, and my mother actually was a very good singer and was able to accompany herself on the most difficult German songs of Strauss and Wolf and Schubert, of course, until she got married, then she gave it all up. But I would like to tell just a little story about the relationship of my father and myself and what I learned very early. And that was when I was 15, I was a member of the Worcester Philharmonic. And it was during the war, and I wrote a piece called Epitaph to the Young American Soldier. And the Worcester Philharmonic did the first performance of it. And I thought, of course, it was a masterpiece. So did both Worcester papers, the Gazette and the Telegram, excuse me, and the Boston Globe even wrote it up. And so, I mean, my future was in good hands. I got a call from one of the major publishers in New York, and they gave me a ticket to go to New York, and I met all the great stars that were being published. And they said to me, we want to publish all of your works, that whatever you write, we're going to publish. And here's the contract. Of course, you can't sign it because you're 15. Take it home and have your father sign it. I went home aglow. And I thought, well, in the first place, I've written this masterpiece. In the second place, these guys are going to publish everything I write. I got home, and my father said, I refuse to sign this. So I was just floored. I said, how can you do this? This is my career. And he said, look, in 2 years, when you look back upon these pieces, you're going to be very embarrassed. I learned that very early, and he was right, and I wouldn't speak to him for a few weeks, but that's okay.
Thank you, Sam. Yehudi, can you top that?
I'm not a competitive guy.
We've been friends for long.
I can't top any of Sam's stories. But the father-son encounter reminds me of what the opera that was done yesterday, the struggle between Don Carlo and his son. And it's really, or Philip and Don Carlo, it's really some story. And I listened to some of the broadcast at the moment that they confronted each other. And I think the father said, I won't sign. Earliest memories, well, I mean, Sam and I share a remarkable parallel path in many respects. Both of us sons of fertile and inspired composers, both of whom dedicated themselves to Jewish affairs, Jewish society, Jewish culture, and in many respects, and often to work in the synagogue and music in the synagogue. Both our mothers were musicians. Evidently, I didn't know that Sam's mother was such an accomplished person, but my mother was a graduate of Juilliard and a competent pianist of certain level, and remained teaching piano for the rest of her life. I was surrounded by musical impressions. My father had been a boy soprano in Kiev, where he sang first in the synagogue with a great man named Zimitrovsky. And then he sang as a soloist to the Kiev Opera, and even sang with Shaliapin in an opera. When his voice changed, he went to conservatory and learned something about music. And when he was 17, on the last boat from Germany, came to America this is before the war, the first war, came to New York and remained there for the rest of his life. So his surround, his embrace of Jewish affairs began not at that point. It began somewhat later, and I was surrounded after I was born, not before, surrounded by Jewish music, cantors and poets, Jewish poets, Yiddish. Almost all his culture was Yiddish, as opposed, whereas different from Sam's, which was largely Hebrew and English. So.
A recent Israeli movie called Footnote explored the tense relationship between a father and a son, both in the same field. In this case, it was Talmudic studies at, was it Hebrew University or Hebrew University? I'd like to explore, or invite you to explore, the relationship between yourselves and your fathers. Was there any tension when perhaps your career in some ways surpassed theirs? Do you feel links stylistically between your music and theirs? And Yehudi, we'll start with you.
Sure. The story, the legends, and the myths, and the theories about father-son relationships are varied. It's not always an Oedipal affair, it's not always a contention, and it's not always a purely loving embrace. I do not recall any tension, obvious or explicit or external tension, between my father and myself. I was groomed, really programmed to be a musician, and programmed to get an education of a kind, and a kind of refined, advanced education that my father felt he did not have. And he felt with every step that I took a great deal of pride, as far as I could tell. The only thing was sometimes when my mother would be excessive in her, as I guess, adoration of her property. I was her property, of course. Being developed, you know, with trees and shrubs and kitchen and bathroom improvements. That he would say to her, why must you glorify? Why do you exaggerate? And indeed, that was the only evidence that he felt that I needed to be kept somehow, somewhat restrained and modest. But I didn't really need that. I never felt a competition with my father. Was I influenced by his music? Certainly a great deal. Perhaps not obviously, but certainly in the deepest sense of a certain love for vocal music, a love for directness, a love for what he would say with worship in his eyes, simplicity. We'd listen to an aria of Verdi at a concert or something of Beethoven's, and he would say, ah, how simple.
Sam,
Well,
father,
it's
son.
remarkably the same I can say about the relationship with my father. There was never a tension except when we played sonatas together. I was a violinist, he was a pianist. We never agreed on tempi and so on and so forth, and fought beautifully about it. But that was about it. He was very proud of my going to school and learning something about music the way he never did. And as a matter of fact, I remember taking counterpoint and bringing home assignments, which he would do first, you know, so that he would also learn how to do these things. And we would do fugues and canons together. This was a lot of fun, and there was no tension that way at all. And I do want to say I was always influenced by his spirituality. He had a remarkable attentiveness to music, and his favorite composer being Bach. He played Bach all the time. We sang through cantata after cantata because that was his gateway to spirituality. And there was never any real tension when this happened. And I must say, though he died so very early, we were not like father and son towards the last, I would say, 15 years of his life, but rather like brothers. And this was a wonderful relationship that I will treasure, of course, all my life.
And stylistically?
Well, stylistically, I did love his beautiful vocal writing and his sensitivity to harmony. And while my harmonic language became very different from his, he had great pride in all the works, especially, I want to say, when he always wanted to write a large orchestral work. And when my first symphony was done, it was recorded on wax, you know, in those days. I mean, I'm an old man, so after all, it was on wax. And I sent him a recording.
It was on stone tablets.
On stone, of course. Later. But I sent him a recording, and after a month, because he played it so much every day, I had to send him another one. So that was a good thing.
All right, more of a loaded question now, and we'll start with you, Sam. Let's talk about the changes in synagogue music since your father's time and contemporary times.
Do we have a week for a discussion?
I think we only have a few minutes. So,
and we need a restraining squad.
yeah. No, look, I have completely accepted what's going on and have determined not to write for the synagogue ever again. I mean, I've written so much music for the synagogue because first of all, I was a worker in the vineyard of the Lord for 15 years in Dallas, and I did what I wanted, and that was a great thing. I had a 100-voice chorus. I did every piece that I ever wanted to do, and it was wonderful for me, and I don't regret anything. I'm sorry that people will not have that same experience, but I think we passed on from there, and that's all I can say. I think if people are happy with what they hear in the synagogue, great.
Very straight answer. Yehudi,
What can I say?
I'm much less accepting of that, of Sam's
I leave that to you then.
philosophical retreat from a certain stand. Synagogue music should be at the service, certainly, of worship. It certainly should be harmonious with the texts that are being set. It should identify and make cohesive a society, a congregation. And above all, it should somehow reflect the highest ideals, aspirations of a group. Now, we're living in a largely secular culture, and the role of religion in organizing and protecting and giving comfort has really receded. I think we can acknowledge that. If religious music really cannot somehow make us cohere, what does it do? Does it reflect our highest ideals? Does it reflect our aspirations? Does it reflect our identity, common identity as a people? And I believe that's the acceptance, very widespread acceptance, certainly in the conservative and the reform shul, the acceptance of what amount to campfire songs is not a very happy identification of our people, of our culture, our long history in one respect or another. I don't accept it. I think it's a disaster. I think it identifies us as a very, very weak sister, and given a culture that's accepting banal values. Now, we may say that's universal. It's happening throughout American culture, and indeed, many aspects of universal culture. But that it's happening does not mean that we can't fight against it, or that we cannot express dismay and a battle against such a thing happening. Because it doesn't take an enormous number of people to maintain stringent ideals for conserving for the future. Look at what happened in the medieval days, where the monks, a minority of people, actually preserved culture. How is it that certain great things from Greek culture, which were passed on, and Roman culture, they were not a continuous thing. They were kept in small groups of people who valued them. So my identification of most synagogue music with these little songs and guitars and nice little songs, I find it deplorable, lamentable, and repugnant. What I would like to do, if I write synagogue music anymore, is to go in the other direction. And somehow, not necessarily a radical direction, but radical only in the sense of trying to find a language that really is commensurate and worthy of the texts that are being said. And that somehow, in addition, meet the needs of common embrace, that people can understand this music. It doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, Verdi is certainly as sophisticated and as electrifying as Beethoven. And the simplicity is enormous as compared to Beethoven's complications. Not better, I didn't say that. So, I've not said it clearly, but I think you understand where I stand.
I couldn't agree more with what was just said, because I feel exactly the same way, except I think we're putting too much on music and why it is the way it is. I think it is a much deeper malaise, and that is, I think it is the theology that is espoused by most congregations and most rabbis, and that is that the music adheres to that. It plays to it. They don't really value the text either. I mean, when I was growing up in the synagogue and was a music director, the rabbi gave a huge sermon each time, which made tremendous sense and was very deep philosophically, spiritually, in every way. It challenged the congregation. And we now are in a period, and I think it started in the 60s with the student rebellion and with the growth of the movement, the camp movement, that everything has to be egalitarian. That means of the lowest standard. I deplore it as much as Yehudi, and I agree with him 100%, but I don't want to just put it on the music. I think it's far more deep-seated than that. Yes. It has to do with theology, has to do with philosophy, and with the education.
Well, on that optimistic note, we do have some more music to hear, and I do not want to take time away from that. And it'll be interesting to hear the pieces that are coming up on the Weiner side. We're going to hear both secular and sacred music, and interesting to hear the relationship between music written for concert stage and music written for the synagogue. Thank you again to our two composers, Sam